when you thank them. But when you deal with a stubborn company and a stubborn industry, you tax them. One point by way of framing is what is biodiversity related tax. This is going to be based on how much harm is being done to the ecosystem and the biodiversity. How will this be done? It'll be a supply side tax, so industries and corporations will be taxed. We'll hire experts in order to determine how this harm is going to be quantified, but it's going to be based off a limit. So the point at which you pass this limit is at the point at which you start taxing you additionally on top of the taxes that you're already incurring, right? It can be decided based on, I don't know, how many orangutans are losing their house, how many trees are being cut down, and how many squirrels are having to be relocated to another house or something like that. Whatever it may be, experts I think will have enough knowledge in order to decide this. I don't think this is part of the debate. I think this debate has to be argued on a principle on whether the outcomes of a specific industry is supposed to be taxed or not. Therefore, very simple with our strategy, all we have to show you on the side of government is that there are harms that are currently being unaccounted for as a result of logging and a result of the timber industry, and the government is having to uptake significant amounts of costs, not just to heal, not just to remedy those particular harms that are being done, but also in terms of regulating the entire industry as a whole. Moving on then to my first argument on the principle. There is like 4 principles in this particular principle argument. I'll walk you through each one. Firstly, on reparations. I think the preface to this is that both sides have to agree to a certain extent that the logging industry does a level of harm to different kinds of stakeholders. And they do this a lot of the time to benefit human beings because of the principle of anthropocentrism. This basic principle means that us as humans view us as being as the center of the planet. That is why everything we do is at the behest of what our leaders want. That is why everything we extract, everything we plunder is for the benefit of ourselves and not other species. But this is where we have to look at what does the harm of the logging industry look like. Number 1, it harms animals and trees. And number 2, it harms vulnerable people. Firstly then, on animals and trees, they can't speak, they don't have a voice, they can't hold protests, they don't have an avenue to express their struggles and to express their suffering. And the reason why we acknowledge this as a society is because of all the things that we already do. We have protected land, we fight for animal rights, we have regulations in terms of animal abuse. All these policies is being done in acknowledgement of the fact that we live amongst different species that are unable to fight for themselves, and that is why we have to reparate them in some way. But secondly, in terms of vulnerable groups, and here is where we talk about the principle of culture. A lot of times, the people, it's not just animals and trees that are suffering as a result of logging, it's also people. Vulnerable indigenous groups that live in the deep Amazonian jungles, that worship bodies of water, that pray to trees, but are seeing all these things that they worship, all these things that they hold at a sanctimonious regard being destroyed, being plundered. I think for these groups of people that have no other avenue to express their qualms or to express how dissatisfied that they feel with the governments, taxation is the way that we solve that. What is the outcome of all these harms? It's cost, right? The government has to pay. The government has to not just pay for all the harms that are being done, but also as a result of the harms that occur as a result of protests, right? The loss of utility amongst people is something that governments have to bear the consequences of, not just in terms of cost, but in terms of government support. What is the impact here? Number 1 is that we fulfill the reparative aspect of taxation. The very fact that we have progressive taxation systems points to show that individuals that profit more from society in any way should be giving back to that same society in proportionate amounts. Which means if there is a corporation that is able to extract benefits from logging and extract benefits from timber, that particular benefit should be one that is given back to society in the form of money. But secondly, we reject anthropocentrism. We reject the fact that humans are in the center of the planet. And given that we have seen many movements fighting towards this, many movements fighting towards viewing the world as something that is being shared with other species, we fulfill that particular principle of environmentalism as well. But thirdly, we provide a unique recourse for culture. Culture that is going to be forgotten on their side. Culture that is going to be made to be extinct on their side whenever you log. The more you log, the more you conduct all these forms of resource extraction that is taking away not just from the habitats of animals, but from the habitats of people that view their habitats as something that is sacred. I'll take the POI.
So what you are trying to imply is the government's job is only to do damage control by taking the tax money and solve the problem, but not preventing these damages from happening in the first place. Thank you.
if that was the case, then we wouldn't do anything in society, because everything will be about prevention. If you want to live in an idealistic society where prevention is better than cure, instead of living in a real society where corporations are horrible and people are selfish, you're welcome to do that. We will live in the real world inside of opposition, inside of government, where these harms are going to occur anyway. It's about how we deal with those harms. That is something that needs to be considered for both sides in order for this debate to take place. But the second argument then is I'm going to run a list of practical benefits that we're able to get. Firstly, the first three very quickly. Number one, we're able to mitigate harm a lot better. This is when we're able to reallocate resources in order to heal the environment, to replant trees, to create more habitats, protected habitats for endangered species, etc. But secondly, this can also look like environmental-sided projects, subsidies for green tech that can be allocated from these particular funds of taxation that you're going to get. But thirdly, it's a lot of also other ancillary benefits, right? How more tax for corporations is a good thing, especially corporations are able to circumvent many forms of bureaucracy. They get tax breaks, they lobby to governments for deregulation. They are already an actor that is damn privileged in the status quo. We need to add a level of taxation that they are unable to escape from. This is an ancillary benefit that we get. But the third, or rather the second part to this practical, is talking about the changing of incentives. When you apply a supply side tax, two things are bound to happen. Firstly, the company absorbs the cost. This is a good thing, because at the point at which this company realizes that this is getting a bit too expensive, is at the point at which they stop logging and they switch to other alternatives that are going to be cheaper and are not going to incur that much tax. Therefore, this increases the amount of access that people get as well. But secondly, and the more likely outcome, is that this is then pushed to the consumer, and this is a harm that they're going to say, that consumers are going to have to bear the cost. This is something that we view as okay, because at the point at which consumers see a higher price tag on that wooden IKEA couch that they want to get, or the wooden IKEA table that they want to get, is at the point at which they reconsider all the decisions that they have been making. Is buying timber worth it? Is it harming the environment in a way that is significant that I have to care about? But judge, even if they don't go through this, the very fact that cost as a metric is make or break for any average consumer to care about anything means at the point at which they say a higher price tag on that particular furniture is at the point at which they say, maybe I should buy just fabric instead. So proud.
Thank you to the Prime Minister for that speech. To continue the debate, I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Man, I don't know about the others, but for a lot of person that I know, including myself, whenever I see something that is expensive, my automatic thought goes as to that, oh, something that is expensive is something that is high quality, something that is a luxury that I must own if I'm rich or whatnot. And the rich people, they don't care about the prices. So members of the floor, greetings to the members of the floor. We are in the debate that this house would impose biodiversity related taxes on the timber sector. And standing as the leader of opposition, I am strongly opposing this motion in the first place. Now, see what side. Before I proceed, let us take a look at the failures from the Prime Minister's approach towards the case. Let us see how they think that the taxes is just a way for them to school these stubborn companies that are just getting away with this illegal logging, and they accuse us of saying that we are actually throwing away the culture. We don't care about the orangutans that die and whatnot. So that is a huge allegation they're making towards us. When we, from side government, from side opposition, we also care about the biodiversity related problems that are caused by these timber industries. But what we believe is that taxes is not the solution to make this problem go away. That is something that they've had to see. Sorry. But look, now coming to another thing another thing that side of government is trying to do is just trying to legalize whatever this and justify whatever these timber harvesting industries and whatnot that are causing these biodiversity problems and whatnot. They're just trying to impose tax so that whenever they pay the tax, they are just justifying, saying that, oh, I paid my taxes, I can do whatever I want, I can pollute the nature or whatnot, and they can always hike up their prices, like make it go 300, 500 from 300 to 500 ringgit products and whatnot, and they can still get the profit because what side government fail to see is that people some of them do care about the price is getting higher, but they always have this thought that, oh, expensive means it is good quality, so it's no harm in paying extra for something that is good quality and the inflation is always there. So they don't look at, they don't question that orangutan is dying in the forest, this company is acquiring timber in an unethical way or whatnot. They just think, oh, this is inflation that is causing the increased prices, so they just have to deal with it and just buy the product and sit and enjoy it at home. So government is not actually catering to the problem by imposing tax. Where side opposition here today, we'd like to give you another alternative as to how we are trying to solve these biodiversity related problems is by actually giving hefty penalties to the offenders themselves. We agree to how the government say we can actually hire experts and whatnot to make a metric system as to how these offences are calculated, how many orangutan dies, or how many trees are cut down, how many homes are gone, or how many air pollution index or whatnot. But rather than imposing tax, why not we give them a hefty penalty that they cannot afford to pay with their money itself, which is, for example, we can shut down their business for 2 months, or we can and these 2 months is not good, it's not long enough. It's long enough for their business to be good, but it's not long enough for them to go into bankruptcy and they cannot restart their company and comply to the ethical practices or whatnot.
The concept of penalties can only be applied in the event the company is doing something illegal. What about your big companies that are able to supersede all this level of regulation and say, I'm going to just do legal stuff, but it's still destroying the environment at the same time?
I think they have failed to see that whatever is causing the biodiversity problem here is the illegality. Instead of you imposing tax on something illegal to make it legal and justify, why don't you put a penalty on it and make them feel like, oh, I should not do this offense, or I have to shut down my company for 2 months, like what side opposition is trying to propose. So that is for like I've said, like what we have said from our mechanism, that for the first offence we can shut down their business for 2 months, which is long enough for them to get a conscience that, oh, okay, I have to restart my business and do it in a more compliant way towards the environmental movements and whatnot. But it's also not long enough for them to go into bankruptcy and they have to shut down their business and timber industry vanishes once and for all. That's not how it works. But let's say if they restart their business after 2 months and they still think that they can get away with it, we still have the expert team that government wants to hire and whatnot, right? So we can use the expert team and check again, and let's say if they do the second offence, then they no longer deserve mercy. So what side opposition thinks is that these kind of companies, the offending companies, their license should be cancelled or suspended once and for all. So this is actually something that leaves a better fear or impact on the companies, on these timber companies and whatnot, from causing more problems. Or if let's say one company get shut down and the license get suspended once and for all, it also causes the other companies, the big superstars and whatnot, to think that, oh, if I do this mistake, I might go into the same thing. I might face the same reality where my company gets shut down for 2 months, my license will be suspended. So I have to adopt the ethical way so that I could stay in the market and whatnot. So let's look at how government has failed with their mechanism to solve this biodiversity problem, where we have shown you that the companies, that they can always hike up the prices, and because they have the branding and whatnot, and the people's mindset that it's just inflation and whatnot, the companies will continue to make profit and even out whatever taxes they are paying. And how side opposition have said that that is not going to work, and we have also shown you that by imposing hefty penalties on these kind of companies, we are actually catering to the problem where these companies will have an increased sense of fear towards adopting these kind of practices, and they will stop these practices, or they will be forced to shut down their business once and for all. Without that being said, never been prouder to propose. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Leader of Opposition for that speech. To continue this debate, I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
I've always wanted to do a paperless speech, so this speech is to Dr. Chandran. Woo! Boss. Don't have sex, let's tax. Okay, that's so bad. But here's how I'm going to structure this speech. The first question I'll answer is, why is their case weird? Their case is to have penalties instead. What is the difference? What is the difference between penalty and tax? It is both form of intervention of the government to give some form of monetary punishment so that you reallocate the money to another good. So to a large chunk, their case is literally proposition, where you give penalties to companies that are bad. Exactly what we're doing. We are imposing taxes on manufacturers, companies that log illegally, for example. These are all instances that harm the biodiversity, and that's why they inflicted on this tax. We were also charitable, because if you were to look at this motion, you think, isn't everything going to be taxed? We said no. There are probably provisions that we can have that specify to what number certain things entail, and if it breaches that number, that's when we tax them. For instance, if you cut a tree, maybe we won't tax you, because then you tax everything, right? But if you cut more number of trees than you're permitted, you're probably harming the biodiversity in a way that's negative, and that's why we tax you. If you use pesticides that harms the soil quality, that leads to erosion, leads to other aquatic creatures that are being affected in this regard. So that's why we tax them, because they could use alternatives like not pesticides in areas that probably can protect the biodiversity, and also, for example, strike the balance between extracting timber and harvesting timber in a way that's good. That's why the first contention we want to make is that their case is literally symmetrical. But secondly, no thank you, let's be charitable to them. Let's say penalties are only imposed in the context of illegal things, and fines or taxes are probably more universal. I would argue that's a harm in their case, because the fulcrum of that case relies on the fact that only illegal activities like illegal logging is what that harms biodiversity. But that's the problem. Literally legal clean ways are also extremely bad towards the diversity and our ecosystem. You can literally cut more trees within a permit. They can say that's not illegal, we have a permit. So they won't solve those problems, they won't inflict penalty under their side of the house. If you use pesticides in ways that are cause degradation and harms aquatic creatures, those are legal ways that harms biodiversity under their side of the house. They have to explain why illegality is only the scope of the debate, when you said it's much more universal and transferable across other contexts, which is why our side of the problem ticks their illegal means as well as a host of other things, which means we win that under that regard. I'll take a point here.
Sir, just to clarify, we didn't say only illegal activities are being penalized. We are saying that unethical practices are also penalized.
Okay, great. Then you're 100% symmetrical. The second part to this argument, I'll explain why there are other alternatives in the POI. This wasn't said by their speech, but it's in the POI. When you do government's tax, they won't solve the root cause of the problem. Solving the root cause of the problem is not exclusive. We can tax the timber industry or tax products of the companies that are bad to the environment, but we can still have law to intervene when there's illegal poaching. I'm unclear why these things are like not mutually exclusive, where you can either tax or you don't send poachers to jail. These two things are not exclusive, which is why solving the other problems are not exclusive. But I'll go a step further. I would argue you need money to be able to regulate. Often, in most contexts of developing countries, there are prioritization towards development and infrastructure, where agrarian, agriculture is less prioritized. You can only name forest frame in Malaysia, there's only one of it. You cannot name many of it. There's not many areas that deserve or got special protection by our governments. Because it's not that they're very corrupt, but it's just mixed prioritization and just too much of baggage they have to deal with. In this context, where governments are probably equipped with so many other things, we think it's great that we give them instruments of money and provisions for us to actually help biodiversity. Because the tax can be reallocated towards a budget to actually improve biodiversity and how we can have more sustainable forestry, for example. That money is instrumental in activating the change that we want to talk about, because they don't explain how you pay people to regulate or police in the first place where we don't have any form of revenue. That's the first part of argumentation to explain why the case is out and on the net we win. Second part of this argumentation, I'll explain why Asan's principal argument was already debate winning. Asan talked about voiceless beings, marginalized groups who were displaced by gentrification, displaced by the fact that there are more profit incentive corporations that care about their own good, and you took away that sacred life that meant a lot to them. And I'll argue it's only for these people they will give reparations back. For trees that were displaced, for trees that were cut down and displaced their environments and made it worse, we are planting it back. We are giving autonomy back to this very group of people that are marginalized and displaced. I think it's privilege for them to say, when you look at Kayu Jati or IKEA table, you won't feel anything. You see like it's luxurious good. That's an incredible privilege compared to people who are poor, who are vulnerable, people who just cannot access anything. I've argued that's an injustice to them, and that's how a principal argument very nicely explains why, independent of outcomes, this is something that has of paramount importance and we ought to do this. Third argument, how do we actually improve diversity and actually have changes on the ground? We actually target companies in ways that they are very unreasonable at. Meaning, if companies violate the environment, do things that are illegal, now we change that psyche because at least when we make it a requirement that we tax them, they are more likely to face that, absorb the tax and change to more sustainable practices. Because they know now, to produce, to manufacture, I've incurred more taxes that harms my bottom line. I should therefore switch to more sustainable practices that makes me more, that reaches the bottom line better and gets more interest in according to my business model. That's exactly why we actually target corporations and change the environment. We can do things like planting more trees. We can do things like more sustainable ways that you can forest instead of using pesticides. These are all positive benefits that are exclusive at the outside. Final argument. How do we change the psyche of human beings and people recalculating better decisions? They said, when you look at things that are priced higher, you think it's a luxury good. Do people smoke because they think it's a luxury good? Do people drink because they think it's a luxury good? It's literally missing the mark. Taxes are imposed on products to create some level of deterrence. That's why we have sin taxes. We tax products that are dangerous to your health in order to prevent some level of deterrence. Maybe it might not mean to you if you have a lot of money, but for a person where it makes or literally makes a trade-off or maybe food, other necessities that are important, maybe let's skip buying the people. Let's go paperless for this debate. That changing the calculation of people can uniquely happen in our world because the end user has to pay more. We would argue it's a net good because at least you're switching to more sustainable practices. Maybe use metal to build a kitchen instead of wood. Maybe you deprioritize the aesthetic value that's spec towards timber, that's actually degrading timber further, but now reallocate it back to something that's maybe more sustainable, something more environmentally friendly. So in the worst case that it harms consumers, we'd argue it's a net good because it actually recalculate the thoughts and improve your way that you navigate through the environment. But finally, assuming it don't help the end consumers at all, end consumers don't have to pay more, that's good because corporations absorb this cost. Corporations absorbing this cost also is a net good, even in the worst case scenario under the world of government, because even though corporations incur costs, translate to most better sustainable practices, that's a net good in our world and it's exclusive. We propose.
Thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. To continue the debate, I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Good afternoon to the floor. Sustainable practices. I mean, sustainable practices are sometimes can be more expensive and hassle than taxes. As you can see, some companies rather pay taxes than adopting a sustainable practice. We can see a lot of examples and many companies do that. Another thing, taxing an illegal way, illegal business, doesn't make it legal. Like we impose, like my Prime Minister imposed just now, hefty penalties. When you pressure companies into paying up hefty penalties or any types of hefty rules, such as my Prime Minister imposed, 2 months of shutting down the business, or maybe 6 months of shutting down the business, this pressures the companies into going into, be like, okay, I might come back to the business, but then I'm not willing to lose it again. Make up very strong regulations and rules, such as taking away their certification, or basically shutting them down for good. And then they say orangutans are losing their homes, squirrels have to find a new home or something because they are getting chopped down. What's the point? When we tax them, they're going to increase their prices. What's going to happen after that? People are going to still buy it. When you increase taxes, they're going to do a lot more logging again. They're going to do the same thing over and over again even though you impose tax. For example, we can see alcohol. Hefty taxes on them, but you can still see a lot of people like buying them and then enjoying themselves. Yeah. But then when you tax them, in the end they're going to end up paying the tax, and then they're going to do the same thing over and over again. And they might think, they were saying that the cost might increase. What the company's going to do? They're going to impose those costs on the consumers. When that happens, they're still going to profit in the end. End of the day, they're still going to profit from it. But as my leader posed, hefty penalties that's very hard for them to afford. Or hefty penalties like just now I said 2 months, 6 months, or something the company not willing to lose. Other than that, they're saying taxing this, taxing that. Fine. There are many companies that have been taxed heftily, but in the end of the day, nothing have changed. They keep doing the same thing. Example, you said alcohol, you can say cigarettes, and many other things. They're getting heftily taxed. We can even say our petrol as well. People are still pouring it. Other than that, when they say it's harming the ecosystem, like I said again, I'm going to say taxes, they're going to pay it off, and they're going to still lose their whole, they're going to lose everything. And they say vulnerable people. As you can see here, these people, if you look into it, they are not being helped. They say people inside the forest losing their home, this and that. As you can see, those people are non-voters, non-taxpayers. So do you think it's fair for them, just because these guys are paying tax, the government side is paying tax, I mean the corporations are paying tax to them? How about the others who lives, they say, vulnerable inside the forest? How about them? They are non-taxpayers. So they have a voice.
So what are you going to do with the money you get from penalties in your world?
When we give penalties,
The money you get, what are you going to do?
okay. Money, what are we doing? Improve it, regulate stuff. I mean, it goes to the government, is it? It goes to the government. And that's what we are saying here. Sustainable practice. There's many sustainable practices that these companies can adopt. But you can see sometimes it can be pretty expensive, and the companies might avoid them. So when they avoid them, what they're going to do is just going to pay up the taxes and just do the same thing. And then another thing they say, just now they say, tax money. What are you going to do with it? They say they're going to improve the quality of things and all that. Is this a charity? Same thing as our penalty. So doesn't. Now I'm going to present a new argument here. The side opposition would rather provide you guys to adopt hefty penalties rather over taxes. Because in most case scenarios, taxes don't usually work. And you can see.
What do you think about penalty in football?
Penalty in
Football.
football. I mean, you can see, you can keep Tonali as an example, who got suspended due to internal gambling. And I'm pretty sure it shared awareness with me, other footballers not to do that. Same thing, correct or not? You can agree with that. So you can see, it causes an awareness where other players in the football, they think that, okay, if I do the same thing, there's going to be a hefty penalty there. Well, whereas, when the players get taxed and all that, they'll be like, I can afford that. I don't mind doing it over again. I can still afford that. Like he was saying, we can refer it to football as well. Garnacho doing the Ronaldo's this one. He got taxed, he got fined. He can afford that. That goes for here as well. Let's say we're talking about companies. If we tax them, they're going to keep on repeating and doing it again and again and again. But if we have a hefty penalty on them, they're going to think twice before doing anything. And that's all. I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. To continue the debate, I'd like to invite the Government Whip here.
The
last time I watched football was when I was 5, so I clearly know nothing about penalties. But let's talk about the penalties that side opposition clearly just doesn't understand how it works, right? Let's deal with penalties entirely, right? So because without the penalty argumentation, the penalty framing that comes with side opposition, if you check your notes, there's really nothing much else they say. A lot of the impacts and the outcomes are symmetrical on both sides. They're kind of arguing the gov case. So if I take down penalties, I think the meta just dictates that they don't have a case anymore and therefore we win and I can sit down. But let's deal with penalties. So it's very strange what they say about penalties. First, you want to notice that two speakers say different things about the implementation of penalties. The first speaker says they'll make it the same as taxes, but it will only be for illegal people. So when they do the illegal form of the eradication of biodiversity, then only we'll take penalties. Number one, if it's illegal, we hold them accountable anyways because legislation exists on both sides nowadays. That means if you log illegally, we'll put you in jail, whether there is a tax or there's without a tax, so there isn't any difference. That means when you're outside when you tax individuals, you cater for the instances in which biodiversity erosion happens when it's done legally. When they say, I have a permit, I have a permission. These kinds of companies still do biodiversity damage. And while we can't stop them from necessarily expanding their industries, we can tax them in order to make sure that at least we can have some level of reparations, and what Hassan already said. But then secondly, this is stranger. The second speaker came out and said, when we impose penalties, we will shut companies down for 2 months and then they'll be fine. Okay, so your alternative to fix biodiversity problems is supply side shocking a developing country, killing a large proportion of their industry, and then shutting them down. In that instance, necessarily in disabling the country from actually helping their people or gaining revenue or gaining any form of economic benefit and therefore killing a bunch of poor people. I am unclear as to why that is then the comparative that they want to deal with in terms of penalties. Like obviously they didn't anticipate that harm, but that's basically what they're describing. At the point which you shut down companies, that's going to have a huge amount of supply side shock. That's the kind of harm that they have to contend with. Deal with it in third speech. Sit down. 3 extraneous responses, right? I'll do 3 extraneous responses, then I'll do clashes and deadlocks. First, they said that high prices of wood objects means necessarily that more people like to buy it. This is a contrived and privileged argumentation. Most individuals, when they see the prices of things go up, they are unlikely to buy it. I don't drink alcohol every day because it's expensive as heck, right? I can't spend 30 bucks every night on a glass of whiskey because that's expensive. So necessarily I'm going to cut down my level of consumption. That innately already shows consumer benefit in order to improve the level of consumption. So I think necessarily when there are high prices, for them to suggest that people want to buy it more is contrived and privileged in and of itself. Secondly, they argue that people will still consume despite the taxes. I think I've already explained this why it lowers consumption. But even if this is true and they will still consume despite the taxes, then it gives the government the resource in order to use the kinds of money into impacting and actually fixing biodiversity issues. Finally, the third argumentation. Oh my god. They said that we don't care about indigenous people because they don't pay taxpayer money. Guys, I didn't know when we threw morality out of the gate. So if people die, and just because they never paid our taxes, then they're no longer our problems and we can continue killing them. That's the exact kind of narrative brought to you by the side of opposition. I'm unclear why this stands in the debate. If I was an indigenous person, I'd probably be very insulted, but thankfully I'm not. So necessarily, I think just doesn't hold weight in the debate at all. Right? Then 2 clashes and deadlocks, just to clear up the debate. One in terms of principles, second in terms of practicals. This is a very simple way, just because it was a simple case. Okay? In terms of principles, Hassan brought to you his favorite 3-layered principle analysis and extensions, right? First on anthropocentrism, why necessarily there's a flawed logic and we need to step in and fix the problems that we are causing in biodiversity. No response does how their penalties necessarily differ and fix this issue. We prove to you multiple layers why taxation actually solves this issue and therefore we win on this independent principle clash. Secondly, on reparative, how taxes are necessarily reparative for the worst kinds of harms done, and it's a principal obligation for the state to therefore step in and get the reparations in order to actually help the people on the ground. Principle not responded to as well. Third, in terms of cultural resource, as I proved to you why there are indigenous communities who not only their livelihood depends on biodiversity, but their very culture. These are unique forms of culture that at a point in which you don't safeguard the biodiversity, it comes with the erasure of the most vulnerable individuals who knew nothing more than the river they worship or the tree they prayed to. These kinds of harms incredibly impact at the point in which you don't hold individuals accountable in order for reparative benefits against these forms of cultural erasure. All in all, the way here is, all went unresponded to. Taxation is still a crucial acknowledgement, and reparations is still a great fixing mechanism in order to prevent these kinds of harms. I'm unsure why penalties meant that. Yeah, you have No? Okay, I'll go on then. Next, in terms of practicals, I'm going to do something weird and experimental here. I'm going to weigh the practical before I say what the practicals actually are, right? So the weight for the practical is simple. Each practical wins on independent metrics because each practical that Asan proved to you already solves biodiversity exclusively. Each one of these, from taxation as a resource generation from the states, consumer calculus, and company self-regulation, independently solve biodiversity issues. That means even if one of them still stand at the end of the debate, that's already debate winning. Insofar as opposition have proved no form of solvency, they say penalties and football for the entirety of the speech and doesn't actually engage with how solvency actually materializes. I'm unclear as to why they get to win on terms of practical analysis and practical solvency, right? Asan says three things on the top of this speech when he talks about practicals. First, taxation as a resource form of generation, where we can tax individuals and then we can use the tax money in order to promote biodiversity and promote forms of green conservation. That is where the resources come in order to promote forms of legislation. That's where the resources come in order to build national parks and make in areas unable to be logged and unable to be touched, even by legal permits. Necessarily, this taxation exclusively exists on outside the house, where we get to the state in order to enable forms of conservation and enable forms of protection. Secondly, on consumer calculus, Kuhn has spent a large amount of time explaining why necessarily the average reasonable consumer are likely going to see the decrease in prices and realize this is not something I want to afford. Therefore, they will go to the companies that didn't ruin biodiversity and have more compatible and more competitive pricing. That forces consumers also to realize that these kinds of biodiversity issues are a problem, and it's a problem that is shown in my very consumption. It changes consumer calculus and gets us to pick better products just because those better products are now cheaper without a tax onto it, right? And third, in terms of company self-regulation, at the point at which a company absorbs a supply-side tax, that's the point they realize that this is no longer a feasible business alternative for me to continue ruining forms of biodiversity. That means companies find alternatives and companies find other ways in order to boost their profit margins, protecting biodiversity as a whole. So you want to side that both principally proves to you why biodiversity is best solved by tax, and also solves the biodiversity issue, something that Op never tried to do at all, side by side of government.
Thank you to the government whip for that speech. To continue the debate, I'd like to invite the opposition whip here.
So very good afternoon to the members of the floor. So today, from what we see, government was talking about prevention is not better than cure. That is what their whole debate was about. They were only focusing about damage control. How do we repair what people have, what the companies, what the giants have done before? But what we are trying to oppose is we want to stop the damage from happening. We don't want it to go to the ends of the earth where we just repair everything with all kinds of money that we have. They are just telling that, oh, we just tax them, we get all of their money, then we just use that to build more, repair what they have destroyed, what they have done. They just want to grab all the money that they can by taxations and everything, just for them to just repair whatever they have. What people have lost, build houses and so on, biodiversity and so on. They just want to repair. They are just focused on damage control. That is what they want. So, with taxation, right? Companies at that particular time with high amounts of taxations, they would just think, okay, I just can pay it off. It's just a slap on my wrist. So the more I'm being taxed, it's okay. I'm just gonna get a slap on my wrist. I'm just gonna go ahead. I'll just pay the tax and just move forward with them. With this, they also fail to realize that with this kind of taxations, right, all the end consumers will get all of their products to be in a higher price range. Yes, the companies will incur a loss, but they will be taken out on the end consumers itself. They will be the ones who suffering all of it together, the wrath of the companies together. Good. Just a moment. So with the increase of taxes, they will just, like I mentioned earlier, they will just pay and just go on with what they have. Corporation is just going to increase the prices, and then consumers are going to get affected. They'll just get out of the hook. They are not trying to save. They're not trying to make lives better they are not trying to make the lives better by preventing it. They just want to maintain on the damage control of that particular damage control from what the company does instead. Yes.
Oh, you can go.
Okay. So from this we can look at the government is always focused on repairing, not fighting forward, not trying to prevent what have the companies have done before. They just want to heal the environment. They don't want to ensure that the companies does not repeat whatever they have done again. They are not fighting for companies to stop their practices. Whatever they are doing is just a slap on the wrist for all of the companies there. They are not trying to amend their ways. They are just promoting the companies to do more harm than good. Whatever they are trying to do is just purely damage control. Let people die. Let people die. Let all the biodiversity die. All the orangutans go die. The squirrels go somewhere else. They just tax on that. They just want to make the damage control prominent here. Without the damage control, we are trying to impose we're gonna impose hefty penalties where it will disrupt the company's revenue instead. Where when the company's revenue are disrupted, they will get a better conscience where they do not want to repeat their mistakes again. Once the company is shut down, the profit loss that they are receiving from that shutdown is inherently directly going to affect the company itself. From there itself, they would have realized, oh, this is a mistake. We should not repeat this again. So it can go up like what my opposition leader said, like RM said, it can go up to revoking their license. So if you revoke their license already, it can be a great example to other companies where their license got revoked. What happens if our license got revoked? That's the main goal here. We are trying to make it a mainstream where companies are afraid. They are afraid to make a mistake. We wanna tell this to the flock where they will be afraid. Not meaning that I just pay off and I just go off whatever I want. We don't want that. Yes.
I'm going to make it very simple for you. In both instances, money goes up from these companies. When you penalize them, money goes up. When you tax them, money goes up. Why is it only when you penalize them is there sudden change of intention from the part of corporations compared to when you tax them, where money is still going up?
Okay, from your side, what you're telling, from your side, the profits, the margins that you have, whatever taxation that you do, how do I say, the margins, the profits are still going on for them. But what we are doing is, we are stopping it completely. We are hanging them out. So when we hang them out to dry, they're gonna feel the rent. They're gonna feel pain. Then that is the time where they will realize we are making them an example to other companies, so they would really open their eyes and they would know, oh, if this happens, we're gonna get our ass fired. So that is what we are trying to mention here. The more we show them their fear, the rest of the companies will follow in line and just go ahead and build a better conscience for them. So with this, I rest my case.
Thank you to the opposition whip for that speech. To continue by opposition reply, here.
Taxes is just a fancy way for the government to close their eyes on companies that are practicing unethical ways of timber harvesting or doing any other unethical practices within the forest, and a high-paying one at that. That is what side government is trying to propose in today's debate, which we find is a very problematic idea if what all that you care about is getting the money and making sure they continue to make more money. That is all. So now, members of the floor, standing here again as the reply speaker from side opposition, again with the aim to oppose the motion where this house would not impose biodiversity related taxes on timber sector. Now, members of the floor, let us look at the major problem coming from the side government's case. See, their entire case is revolving around how they are going to get this taxpayers' money, and then from that taxpayers' money, they will do this. The tax money that is done after lots of harms was also done in the forest, then they take this money and then they try to do damage control and whatnot. Like what we have been repeating ourselves from the first speaker until the third speaker, we have been saying to you how state government is only caring about trying to do damage control with the money. But it looks to us as if though the government is actually more concerned on getting money, but that is not actually solving the biodiversity problem well. Because members of the floor, like what we have told you, see, even though you take the tax money and then you feel like that is going to compel them into, you know, adopting more ethical practices because this is money consuming or whatnot, but we have told you from our second speaker how you, regardless of how you take money from them and try to do other activities and think that would force them to adopt sustainable practices. But these guys, they will what they think or transitioning to a more sustainable way is actually full of hazard and it's actually more expensive. So I actually rather just pay the tax and then increase the price a bit. I can still get my profit, I can still level up my business. Somehow I have a reason to now justify saying that, oh, I pollute the environment, I do byproduct, I use pesticide, I kill orangutan, I chase away indigenous people from their home and whatnot. Because I pay the taxes, the government give me tax, I pay taxes, I'm done. That is what they are trying to fight for in today's debate. Whereby from side opposition, we are telling you a more compelling idea where instead of you imposing taxes on these people, we have told you how by giving them a more severe penalty such as shutting down their business for 2 months is going to knock some sense into these brainless people that they should adopt an ethical practice or they cannot sustain their business even further. So after 2 months, they are knocked down, but they can still get back up if they do ethical practices. But let's say if they decide to do unethical again, then these guys don't deserve mercy. They have their license have to be revoked, cancelled, suspended, whatever it is. So these guys should not ever step into the market again. That is what you teach. That is how you teach a lesson to the stubborn kids from side opposition. So, ladies and gentlemen, you guys can decide which side you find more compelling. Someone who is giving more money and asking and telling you that you have to give more money, but then when you hike up your prices, you get more money, then you can level up, and then I can use the money to do some damage control and some PR and show to the world that I am caring for the world. When instead we are actually better caring for the world by actually giving more severe penalties to this company that they cannot pay off with their monies and actually solving the problem by reducing these companies' unethical practices and by causing any biodiversity related problems and whatnot. With that, I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the opposition reply. To conclude the debate, I'll reply if you're here.
This team says vulnerable people don't pay tax, screw them. So babies don't pay tax, screw them also lah. Retired people don't pay tax, screw them. This team misses why vulnerable people have been systematically displaced and marginalized by governments by way of corporations actually disrupting biodiversity. We're giving autonomy back to these people and that's why we ought to win this debate. I'll tell you 7 reasons why they lose this debate. The first reason is that their solvency is symmetrical. Literally, we told you from the bench, penalties are similar to tax. You're giving a monetary punishment because you're using the money for other things. It's literally similar. We were charitable to them. Maybe they're targeting illegal things. We're saying we're both legal and illegal. They PY, they're saying we're also that. Great. So we have 6 people, government team, literally the same solvency. Secondly, this team is incredibly unresponsive. Really, they all are the ruthless rebels, not responding to anything. Our principal argumentation, we told you why, independent of outcomes, it's important because vulnerable people are displaced, they ought to be compensated. Voiceless beings ought to be compensated. Their response to the principal argumentation was nothing, which means there's no weighing as to whether the pragmatic outweighs the principal or like this is incredibly tied to pragmatics nothing. So independent of that, I would argue that our principal argument still stands insofar as whatever we say in terms of practicality method, the principal argument still stands. They had no response to how we structurally transition from companies to absorb their costs and to be more sustainable. They didn't disprove our mechanistic links. They don't prove why these arguments don't stand in the debate. We structurally prove why tax systems act as a deterrent for people. That's how we change the calculation of people. No response there. Absolutely no response, just going back to the same thing that governments can't do anything. I would argue that's not charitable towards our contentions. Third reason why they lose is their characterization of governments hurts their case. They said in our world, governments are just going to impose the tax and don't do anything. But in their world somehow, when you impose penalty, the money can improve, the money can change. So I'm unclear what premise are they relying on. If it's problematic in our world and there's a utopia in their world, there has to be some debate here where there's some semblance of change. We give you structural mechanisms as to why we achieve that. The fourth reason why they lose is they don't build the counterfactual. We said there's special provisions that's created that leads to a budget, entire budget created that leads to tax revenue that we can get, and then we reallocate back to green projects. That whole structural mechanism was present down the bench, but they just said fear, create the fear, but there's no mechanistic link to prove actually what their actions are in this debate. So I'm unclear where the footing actually stands in the debate. Fifth reason why they lose is they are incredibly inconsistent. Note the first speaker said, when you look at something more expensive, you will feel like it's a luxury item, so they'll just cussing it and buy it. But at the end they say, kasihan lah, the end user, it's too expensive. Which is it? Is it the characterization that people can afford it anyway because it's a luxury good, or the fact that they're marginal? It's inconsistent. I don't know which one to value and weigh at this point in the debate. The final reason why they lose this debate is because they shat on our entire case because they say tax systems are just preventative, but in the same breath they said, let's create fear of companies to prevent it. Isn't it both preventative to begin with? So their contentions or concerns with our case is their premise. Their benefits are also our benefits. Again, I repeat it, it's 6 people down the government bench. That's why they lose debate. 2 areas in which we really cemented the debate home. Firstly, assuming whatever we said is untrue, that it's somehow we cannot allocate tax money, their governments are corrupt, we really cannot create all these grassroots changes of green projects. What is certain is deterrence. The fact that we tax companies higher, they are facing a tax and that affects their bottom line. They either deter from at least marginally not abusing the environment more, or they absorb this cost in a way that actually prevents them to be more sustainable at least. So that is certain, independent of whether we create green projects or whatever, the fact that companies are deterred is a benefit on our side. But second benefit on our side is that even if people are not effectively transition, or they can still buy the kayu jati because they see it as a luxurious good, that marginal change, the marginal change to an average lay person that said, today I'm not going to buy paper, today I'm not going to buy the wooden table because I cannot afford it, let's put it to other things as well, find alternatives that are more green friendly. That's at least a marginal change in our world that is certain in the round. For the reason that this team is inconsistent, we ought to anticipate.
Here.